Welcome to this brief introduction to what TraceCloud can do to help you manage your compliance program for a healthcare facility. So your typical use case is you have a compliance program, for example, say NABH 2025, um, and you run multiple medical facilities. And the program itself comprises a collection of requirements. And what you need to do is those requirements need to be met by compliance actions to satisfy the requirements. And then you need to be able to validate that the actions have completed. More importantly, if you think of this pyramid as a body of work, it represents both your process and your data so that when the compliance authority comes around from an audit perspective, we should be able to prove that you have a resilient process, you have the data to back it up, it's not dependent on one or two individuals, and it's consistent and it's thorough. The goal is to kind of have this entire body that gives you risk-free visibility to how your different facilities are tracking, learning from, and implementing these compliance programs requirements. So with that, let's take a click into it. So your next level goals are you have many distributed medical facilities. They could be small, they could be large, they could be in the same location or distributed across different cities. They need to clear compliance audits from different governing authorities. And the audits may happen monthly, annually, once every few years. They could vary in complexity. But what you're looking for is a program that gives you relatively risk-free audits. And you also need visibility to the program, and you want to be able to visualize the risk ahead of time. You also want to save money and time. You're looking for a relatively simple process. You don't want to overcomplicate it by moving to this new process where you already have something that works right now. So some of the challenges you're facing I'm assuming, in whatever program you have right now, is that you don't have a centralized source of truth. You have no way of automatically identifying gaps in your compliance requirements and the activities that are being done to meet them. Your system is, while it works, it's not super productive. You have no way to automatically identify and fix the risks that are going to kind of put your audit at risk. You don't have a solid versioning ability because these requirements change on a regular basis. The body that kind of does the audits might say, in 2025, these are the requirements. In 2026, we have modified them slightly. And you want to be able to maintain the different versions of those requirements. You want to be able to baseline at a certain point in time and be able to say, well, in 2025 January, this is what the source of truth looked like. Since then, we've been following it, but here are the changes. You want a system that's easy to use, but your current system may not be. Your current system does not provide collaboration between sites. You have some sites that are doing an amazing job and passing an audit without any risk. Some sites that are relatively new, the staff is newer, they haven't been trained well, and the amazing learnings that have happened in one site haven't, I would say, filtered their way to all the other sites. And you know your current system does not scale. You would love to have a centralized process. So as staff moves between facilities, they're all looking at the exact same process. You have a ton of documents and Excel files flying around. You don't have change control. For example, if you decide to change the process in a certain way, how do you ensure that all the sites have picked up the change and digested it? Again, you're looking for a low-cost solution. You need a single pane of glass dashboard. You don't have to look at 10 different places to know whether the audit is on track or at risk. Again, you currently struggle to produce documentation when the auditor asks for it. And this is the most important one. You have attrition risk. That means there are one or two people in your organization that know how the process works. If they were to find a new job, you would struggle to fill the tribal knowledge that they have gathered. So what you're looking for is a system that kind of solves these challenges for you. So essentially, you need a centralized repository, one place where you can track all your compliance requirements. But you want the ability to be able to set up this repository for each facility and be able to localize to their needs. For example, your fire codes might be different in each city, right? You need a framework that lets your team collaborate. You don't want siloed workloads. You need an approval workflow that ensures that when somebody says, this is the requirement or this is the activity to meet that requirement. It has been validated and approved and confirmed by the people who are subject matter experts. You want to be able to visualize risk ahead of time. You want to see progress. You want to see roadblocks. You need a system that's, again, as I mentioned earlier, inexpensive, easy to use, helps scale, and is proven. So that's what TraceCloud is. It's designed specifically to meet this particular need. It gives you a project structure. It gives you ability to control change. So, authorized people can make the right changes, but it also gives them the ability to collaborate. So, who to, or where to look for information, how to find the gaps, who to ask for help. It lets you connect these different pieces of information so you can actually follow a daisy chain. And it gives you flexibility. Like I said, it's not a straight jacketed system. It gives you a process that you can modify to your needs and then enhance on it and learn from it. Of course, it gives you an ability to track and deliver so your audits are relatively risk-free. So one way to visualize this is think of TraceCloud, the box on the left, as both your source of data, source of record. It is also a process that kind of helps keep this entire compliance process on track. Then your stakeholders, they could be your doctors, your healthcare professionals, validators, approvers, vendors, compliance authorities. They all interface through the browser using into the TraceCloud system. Now, what you get from that is you get a common project structure that everybody knows how it is going to look and behave. There is a structured collaboration and control flow. There is an approval workflow built in so that you know that authorized people who are subject matter experts have approved the work. And there is end-to-end traceability and change management. So that's what I'll be demoing in a few minutes. And to make sense of any program, think of them as these bite-sized chunks, the 10 steps that you need to take to get to sanity. And if you understand these 10 steps, it will make it easier for you to digest the process of onboarding and visualizing what this look like, say, 2 months down the road. So step one is you need to be able to define your project's compliance structure. That is, what are the different types of requirements you want to track? What are the different programs you want to set up? What are the different entities within your medical system that need to track and validate and work on those requirements? That's what we call your structure. Then, as you get these requirements, there may be hundreds or thousands of them. You don't want to lose sight of them or lose control of them putting all of them in one bucket. So you want to organize them further by different departments and owners and functions. And then you already have a lot of legacy workloads in Excel files or Word documents. You need an easy way to import the data into the system. And of course, we would have by then set up different roles and change control frameworks, right? So then people start using the system and then they start making these connections that says this compliance program comprises these compliance requirements. And here is a review we're trying to address. And here are all the activities we're taking to meet those requirements. And here are the outcomes. So you want to be able to make those connections between the systems and be able to start maintaining a system of record. And then that's where you start visualizing your end-to-end traceability. And then, of course, you have a dashboard that helps you keep an eye on the metrics. And then somewhere along the way, we activate your approval workflow for all the activities and reviews and change. And then you want to be able to replicate this process across many sites by click of a button. And then, of course, you have a central repository that keeps on refining and getting better. And the central repository is what pushes these package requirements to different sites. And along with it, in the background, you get a versioning, change log, and audit trail. So anytime an auditor comes and asks you to prove something, you don't have to worry about it. It's already in the system. You can prove that. So with that, we'll spend the next few minutes drilling down into these 10 steps, and then I'll walk you through the tool itself. So step one, how do you define a compliance structure? It's pretty simple. We work with you. And what you're seeing on the left-hand side is basically this is what the tool look like. I will show that to you in a few minutes. The idea here is you set up a compliance program. Compliance program itself has compliance requirements. Those compliance requirements go through a review process, and then you have the validation results. And that's where we work with you to kind of set up your project structure. But like I said, even within the project structure, once you talk about compliance requirements, when you have hundreds or thousands of them, you want to organize them better. Think of them as your file explorer on your computer. Right? You can define different departments that are participating in the compliance activity. And then for each department, you can organize and sub-organize the requirements or activities based on that. Then, of course, you need to be able to import your data from Excel. That's where typically most of our customers tend to have their information. So we have an easy upload process where you can import from Excel into this new process. And more importantly, we also have an Excel-like interface to modify your data because people are so used to working with Excel. Even though the information is the database, you should be able to say, show me an Excel-like view, and people can just directly work on those requirements, update them. It looks just like working with an Excel file. Your next step, of course, is to kind of set up your roles and change control frameworks. You can define different roles for approvers, validators, program managers, and they have permissions on reading those folders or updating those folders or approving those folders. So we will set that up for you. And the next step, of course, is starting now that you have the structure, you have the program, the requirements, and the activities, you start connecting that workload. We call that traceability or creating links. So you can create a link between a compliance requirement to a compliance program, or a compliance activity to a compliance requirement, or a validation activity to the actual compliance activity. So you can use these traceability tools that exist inside TraceCloud to make those connections. The beauty of making those connections is if you go back to this original graph that we had in this pyramid, remember you have a program comprises requirements, requirements in turn need actions, and the actions need to be validated. You can start visualizing that in a org chart or a traceability tree kind of view. So what you're looking at is a real screenshot from the product. I have this accreditation coming up that comprises many requirements, your compliance requirements 60, 61, 200, and those in turn further break down into these activities. And the activities themselves need to be validated. And in the database, as you make these connections, the system is able to remember what those connections are. You do get these benefits by virtue of connecting, which is when a requirement gets modified, it starts showing up as a suspect and the suspect basically indicates a change that has been made to a requirement or an activity that has not been approved by all the related authorities, right? And that's how you start visualizing. Ideally, you want everything to be green, but if you see a small red arrow out there, that means that activity, it has a change in the system and the flux has not been approved by everybody, right? So you also can identify things like dangling. That is, I have a compliance requirement that is not being validated further downstream, or I have a compliance requirement without any activity, right? So you start the system, because it's a database and a process, it's able to start visualizing and identifying that information for you. Now, I will show that later in a few minutes. Like I said, you get a dashboard. It starts telling you how many of your compliance programs requirements are dangling. That means there's no downstream activity. How many are pending approval? How many have passed pending? How many have failed pending? Right? You start getting those metrics from the system. Um, Now, you also have an approval workflow built into it. So anytime a requirement is modified or it needs to be validated, you can configure this process. You could say, for example, I have a radiology requirement that needs to be approved by the validators first. Once the validators approve, it goes to the approvers. And once the approvers approve, it goes to the program manager. Then it's finally considered approved. So there's a built-in approval workflow. And once you kind of get to that level where your one site is working fine, then you can start setting up a centralized repository that's able to push its compliance requirements to different sites. And each site can start implementing the exact same process. So you start getting to a point where you know that all your sites are following the same framework, typically the same data, and they are doing their own compliance activities at each local site. And because it's a centralized database, you get this audit trail and versioning that's built into the system, and it's for free, right? Um, it might be a little overwhelming when you think about this entire program, but we call this the baby steps to value. You don't have to wait for a very long period to see value. You can pretty much within the first 3 weeks set up your compliance structure, import your data, start committing and collaborating. You start seeing value there. Once you kind of start generating reports, connecting requirements, and start your first compliance program, Within week 4, you should be able to say, I am ready to kind of run my pilot compliance program. And after that, you can kind of scale up and go beyond that. Um, so just a brief history about TraceCloud. We've been around since 2009. We initially started out as a requirements management solution. Typically, if you're doing a large civil engineering construction project or a systems engineering project, you would use something like TraceCloud to manage your requirements. Then we kind of branched off into model-based system engineering. And now we are in compliance management, right? So we have some of our clients who use the compliance management product are New Zealand's Health of New Zealand. This is South Australia, Queensland government. We have multiple hospitals being built using this system. Sutter Health in Palo Alto uses this. And of course, you have a lot of metro systems and large complex engineering solutions that use it. We have 15,000 plus users. With that, let me dive right into the demo of the product itself. So what you're seeing here is a project. I've set up this project. I'm assuming I work for Escorts, and Escorts is trying to set up a compliance program. And they have multiple locations in India, for example, or in Dubai or Middle East or Europe. What they have is a concept of a compliance program, and they have many compliance programs they need to comply with. They may have one for blood bank, they may have one for NABH accreditation, fire safety, GST, right? So each program in turn has its own collection of requirements which are tracked here. So if you go to compliance requirements out here, you can create multiple subfolders for each compliance program. So since I'm working on NABH, I've created a folder for NABH. There are about 214 requirements here. And those requirements, again, are broken down into subfolders. For example, I might store my equipment and technology, which comprises radiology and surgery. I might have my information requirements out here. So if you look at radiology, we have a bunch of compliance requirements in radiology for NABH accreditation. Now, like I said, you could simply import them from Excel. I could say I have them in Excel file, I want to import them, or you could create one compliance requirement at a time on your own. And the system is flexible where you can define what information you need to capture for each requirement depending on your use case. So now that I have my compliance requirements, they themselves kind of break down further into compliance actions. So for example, I might go and say, well, we are working on 2025 for my radiology. I can create my compliance actions that I'm going to do. And those actions themselves eventually start, once a validator comes into picture, they will come here and say, well, we are going to create our validation requirements for that compliance activity. Now, they all get connected one to other in a daisy chain. So for example, if you go back to my compliance requirements for radiology, let's pick one. So if I look at this mammography standards, let me open this one up. So this requirement looks like this. It may have certain attributes attached to it, but more importantly, it's connected to other work that's being done in the system. By virtue of it being connected, what I get is I get this graph that says, okay, this compliance requirement is here to satisfy these two compliance programs, but it needs these activities to complete it, and those activities are being validated here, right? So you start connecting your pieces of information, and the beauty of that is that information starts getting reported at different layers. For example, for all the activity happening in this program, I can simply go to the metrics dashboard. It tells me how many requirements have passed approval, how many requirements are in different approval workflow, how many are dangling, that means nobody's working on them downstream. So you start getting these dashboards both at a folder level or at an owner level. So for example, for all the requirements that I own in this project, I get my personalized dashboard, or I get to see other people's dashboards out here. There are a lot more complex frameworks out here. For example, I can look at requirements that I have rejected, and it's able to say, well, this requirement has gone through an approval process and it has been rejected by me, and this is what I need to do to approve it, right? Or it has a versioning concept, so it's able to maintain an audit trail and different changes. But net is this is a predefined and centralized system and a program of both your requirements, your activities, your validation results rolled in with an approval workflow and a dashboard, right? So this is just a sample program I set up. You can set this up for whatever level of complexity that meets your use cases. And it's in the cloud. It's super fast. It's been used by 15,000 plus users over the last 15 years. Referral customers available in this multiple fields. And yeah, if you have any questions, please reach out to us. We are offering a consulting session for you to kind of just understand how it works and how you can leverage it. Drop a note to support@tracecloud.com, and that should give you what you need. Thank you very much.